So, oh, Toni Lyn's suggesting better acronyms than just RAT. I think that's a great idea. RAT is not very appealing. We'll work on it. Okay, Toni Lyn's going to take us home.
Thanks, super. So great to be here. And to follow that up, yeah, so before we move to the next slide, I just got to be back and redo the surveys I'm going to talk to you about today with my 9-year-old, and I was up at Mosquito Flat, this is right near there, and took my son to 11,000 feet, and he had a little bit of elevation headache, and I was like, we'll be done in 6 hours, but he did great. And it's just super to be back trumping around Sierras again. So, okay, next slide. So I just wanted to, if you probably already have noticed, but all the work you're hearing about that's happening in California is not just because we're here in California talking about California, but because there's more capacity in the Southwestern US and in California in particular than anywhere else, I would argue, in the world to be doing refugia conservation. It's really fantastic. It's been hard to leave California and try to do work elsewhere, don't tell anyone, but here's an example. So we brought a bunch of practitioners and managers and researchers together just before COVID. So maybe you were there and you remember, or maybe you were there and you don't even remember, but we were hosted by Yosemite, and one of the outcomes was this, what refugia for what? We had a lot of dialogue and came up with this list of things. And so there's this publication out there led by my postdoc, Kathleen Belantic, that you might want to check out, which is what are the places what are the ecosystems and species we want to focus our refugia conservation on for the Sierra Nevada. And next slide, tearing off of that, I want to talk about a project that I did in Sierra Nevada meadows. And so Megan already introduced this so well, so I'll just say that I'm going to walk through this cycle in the next few minutes. So next, and where we always begin is sort of identifying the management objectives, which we were lucky to have Claudia walk through. And this is maybe sometimes what this looks like now. Sometimes it just looks like Zoom windows, but we used to do this, and I think more and more we're doing it again. All of us around a table kind of talking about our values and our objectives and what we have set out in plans. And so what are we working toward? And that's that first circle in the climate change refugia conservation cycle. Next. And so we got together with those managers and asked, what is it that you want to see refugia for? And one of the top answers were meadows, montane meadows. And so here's some reasons for that. We know that they're botanically diverse, they're important to the animal communities, critical to hydrological function, and they're significant to the recreation economy. I don't need to tell you all about that, you already know. Slide. So we mapped climate change refugia for meadows, the 17,000 meadows in the mountains of Sierra Nevada and slightly north, led by my postdoc Sean Marr, using data from the Flints. We won't get into these details, but happy to share, and it's all available. This was originally funded by the California LCC. It's all published and ready to go. Next. So this is that, like, kind of fast forward for years. The outcome of that was this map of, in blue, the places that are refugial meadows. And not only do you have to say kind of for what, but you have to define how you're deciding what something is, how it's refugial. And so here's 4 cuts of that. So you can see, like, the least change in annual temperature, the least change in max temperature, the least change in min temperature, and then the least change in annual precipitation. So you could imagine different kind of iterations of that here. Next slide. So one of the things that we find really important to this, though, is to make sure that we are testing those hypotheses, because really that was just a hypothetical map based on climate models. They're good models, but they're not perfect, as know what models are. And so we wanted to see were there ways to test that. So I think, go ahead, and there's that little circle, and then go ahead. And we actually just recently published on that, and that same special issue we keep bringing up, saying that's a really important piece, is to, you generate these spatial hypotheses, you can do it in a bunch of different ways, but then you have to test them, and you can do that in a bunch of different ways. And then after that, you've got validated map that you can work from. Go ahead. So in this case, we actually were lucky to have a data set based on a climate change vulnerable montane meadow specialist, Belding's ground squirrel, that we had data from 100 years, highly detectable, group living, specializes in this habitat that we could use. Next. And that data set looked like this. So we found that there were, we had 74 sites from 100 years ago, and we went back and found that they were persisting about 50% of those sites, which was really surprising. And also an opportunity to test, were they persisting in the places that we said were refugia? Next. And go ahead. And so here's that map again. And on the next slide, you'll see that we tested out those different cuts of refugia. You can see that on the x-axis, and then the proportion of sites where they were persisted. And we found all those asterisks show that, in fact, the Beldings persisted at the sites that we had defined as refugia. So that was really exciting because it validated what we had modeled. Next. And we then were able to do a couple other tests. So I did like a one summer tromp through Yosemite backcountry, and the places where the Beldings were also tend to be refugial. That was not over time. That was just a slice in time. Next. And then we also looked at genetic diversity, and that seemed to support it. Next. And we also looked at connectivity, which we can talk about maybe in the question and answer, but that's also, of course, important. Next. So here's that kind of summary of all those things. And on the left, we can talk about the actions you might take, like minimize overgrazing, or thinking about the encroaching conifers, or road and trail impacts, and other things like that. And one particular example I want to talk about next is a collaboration that we had with Cal Trout and IBC, looking at restoration. So they were wanting to restore some of those 17,000 meadows, and we were able to use that information next to say, here are some places that are most likely to be refugia into the future. And so those would be one reason to prioritize these meadows. Now there's other reasons to prioritize meadows, but you've got a choice of 17,000, you could probably do 30. So you need lots of reasons to cut the list down. And so this is one of the ways that we did it with them. That was a really satisfying project. So I think that's it. If you go to next, I'm just showing again that we have all this information on the Climate Refugia website. It's constantly being built and refined. Nina's here, one of the interns. We're doing super good work, and happy to take questions later. I think that's the last slide. And there's the special issue. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Toni Lyn. All right. That was a whirlwind of a lot of stuff. So we have time to, let me